President-elect Donald Trump putting out a statement on Truth Social just about an hour ago saying Pete Hegseth is doing very well. His support is strong and deep, much more so than the fake news would have you believe. He was a great student, Princeton, Harvard educated with a military state of mind. He will be a fantastic high-energy Secretary of Defense, one who leads with charisma and skill. Pete is a winner, and there's nothing that can be done to change that. A lot to discuss, as always, so I do want to bring in Rich Rubino, political analyst and historian, and a great friend of the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on again, Josh.
Of course. Well, first off, I want to start as we talk about Hegseth meeting there with lawmakers on Capitol Hill across a several-day period here. What does that say to you overall? Because I have to point out that we had Matt Gaetz when he was the pick for Attorney General. He met with lawmakers for several days and then withdrew his name there. So what do you make of those meetings? Does it say anything overall?
Yeah, and I think they're doing everything possible to try to get the requisite 50 votes. You saw Norm Coleman, very formidable figure, former senator from Minnesota. He's a gentleman that's kind of the liaison, if you will, bringing the senator, bringing the potential secretary to different Senate offices. So that's what's really going on. They need to get to 50 votes, and I think they probably figure that Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, they're probably not going to get. Joni Ernst is obviously somebody that they're very much trying to get other United States senators as well. They probably have written off every Democratic senator. But in the case of Matt Gaetz just simply did not have the votes, and I think he realized that. And I think Donald Trump certainly does not want to use all that much political capital simply on nominations. I think he'd rather have it used on policy. That's why he's saying to the potential secretary to just go out there and to fight. But I don't think he's really doing much behind the scenes to try. I mean, he's not using that much political capital here.
When we talk about some of the other nominees overall, I want to go a little bit more in depth there because we've talked about Hegseth, but what about some of the other picks there? Are there any other concerns overall when you look at them as a whole?
Usually the picks, the United States Senate is kind of deferential to the president. Even members of the other party will vote for most of the president's nominees. There's usually one or two that become kind of controversial. I think this time around, you'll see many of them. Marco Rubio will probably have almost ecumenical support in the United States Senate, for example. I think that Doug Burgum, as the potential as is the nominee for Interior Secretary, will probably have support. He's very much kind of an establishment type of a candidate. But then when you go to someone like Tulsi Gabbard has always been kind of an iconoclast or a contrarian, if you will, in the United States House of Representatives. She was formerly a very liberal Democrat, first in the United States Congress, and then when she ran for president in 2020, she since has moved a little bit ideologically to the right. Of course, she will say that it wasn't her who left her party, or party left me, which is kind of her mantra, I guess. But I think she'll have some opposition among some Republicans are going to be looking at whether she'll really be the person to be in charge of not 18 intelligence agencies to report to the Director of National Intelligence. So she'll be somewhat controversial. I think most of them, though, you will hear very little about, and I think the Senate will pretty much give almost universal support to.
I have to ask because there are reports that started to circulate just a few days ago that Trump was speaking with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and could potentially be considering him in some aspect here to be defense secretary. So can you kind of explain that thought process there? And does it appear that he has maybe the qualifications as well?
Well, the qualifications are arbitrary and capricious, but I think that in terms of Ron DeSantis, he's kind of the plan B. This would be a consolation prize. Ron DeSantis himself tried to run for president in 2024. Never really got anywhere, lost to Donald Trump after Iowa, New Hampshire, had to drop out. There's some history between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. Back in 2018, Ron DeSantis was the insurrectionist candidate. He was very much the underdog. Adam Putnam, the agriculture commissioner, was the establishment favorite to become the Republican nominee for governor of Florida. Donald Trump made an endorsement to DeSantis. that propelled DeSantis to rise in the polls. He won the nomination and then barely won the governorship, then won re-election in 2022. The one thing Donald Trump really prizes is loyalty, but Ron DeSantis, even though Donald Trump was very loyal to him in terms of bringing him up from the ashes in 2018, he ran against Donald Trump. So it's very interesting that Donald Trump and him have kind of had some sort of a rapprochement, if you will, where they've really kind of gotten together. And this would show that I guess there's no hard feelings in that relationship. And with Donald Trump potentially bringing him as a defense secretary, and Ron DeSantis is somebody whose term limit in 2026. And if he is appointed, then there's a possibility, depending on when he becomes the governor, on when he resigns his seat, that Jeanette Nunes, who's the lieutenant governor, would actually be the person who would appoint the successor to Marco Rubio in the United States Senate, and not Ron DeSantis.
So on that note, does it appear that maybe they have mended their relationship overall?
Yes.
Because as you mentioned, they did have a good relationship and then it kind of went sour a little bit. But now is it coming back together? Are they coming back together?
Yes, I think so. And one thing about Donald Trump is he has a very kind of interesting relationship with some of the people that he finally appoints. Marco Rubio and Donald Trump ran a very spirited campaign against each other back in 2016. You might remember Donald Trump calling him Little Marco, and Marco Rubio saying that Donald Trump had 4 bankruptcies. They really went after each other, but they've had a rapprochement. Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, ran against him in 2016. Donald Trump questioned his intelligence, but then when Donald Trump becomes the president-elect, he brings Rick Perry with him, and Rick Perry becomes Secretary of Energy. Kellyanne Conway was very much a Ted Cruz supporter in 2016. In the 2016 election, she became very much an ally of Donald Trump. Ted Cruz himself had a very vicious campaign between him and Donald Trump, both running against each other. But in 2018, when Ted Cruz called him, Donald Trump came and campaigned for him in his reelection against Beto O'Rourke. So Donald Trump can go really from alliances to adversaries and back and forth, kind of to make a rapprochement. He's that's one thing that he's very much. It is very much interesting to watch how he does that.
All right. Rich Rubino, as always, political expert and analyst. We appreciate you taking the time to join us and help break it all down. Anything else you want to add here before I let you go?
I would just say in the House of Representatives, it's very interesting that there's going to be a very interesting nomination. So the steering committee is in the House of Representatives responsible for this, but in the Agricultural Committee, Dave Scott is the incumbent. He's 79 years old, and he's had 2 challenges from both Angie Craig, a moderate from Minnesota, and Jim Costa, a moderate from California, to become the agricultural secretary. It's going to be very interesting because this is kind of shows that many respects there are some Democrats, and this goes on the Oversight Committee as well, where AOC is potentially running, that do not think seniority should be the only factor to become chairman of a committee. They think they're looking for some new blood. And this would be a very interesting one to watch. David Scott is very much an institutionalist. He's had some problems, some health problems over the years. So he's being challenged in his own committee. And you'll see this in some other committees as well, where some of the younger members are becoming kind of impatient, if you will, and are ready to take the dais of the chairmanship. So they're taking on the chairman of their. So you're basically having a scenario where some of the younger members are taking on incumbent members of the committee. Or if there's an open seat on the committee, you might, like, for example, on the House Oversight Committee, where AOC is running, you might see a race between some members who have been there for quite a while versus some members who are like Jerry Connolly for Virginia versus members who have been there for a very for a very short period of time, who are very ambitious in terms of trying to take the gavel.
Rich Rubino, as always, we appreciate you taking the time to be here. Have a great weekend.
Thank you as well, Josh.